If you have a hard time with boundaries, how might your life be different if you could say no as easily as a joyful yes? I'm Love Coach Mariya, and for over a decade now, I've been encouraging folks to empower their compassion so it's big enough for ourselves as well as others, and so our boundaries can become healthier than ever. You're listening to Empower Your Compassion, and on this show, we'll be unlocking transformative insights to help you reconnect to your true yes, so you can say no from that more expansive energy and get more of what you want in your relationships and your life without sacrificing your compassion. Are you ready for more love? Let's grow. Hello, thank you for joining me today. We've been talking about the Gates method of developing healthy boundaries, and it involves getting in your body, checking in with your limits, and reminding yourself that other people can learn to handle themselves, even if you can't help them out, and delivering your no in a way that doesn't disconnect. And what we'll talk about in the next episode is just the ongoing sort of maintenance of our boundaries. But today, I wanted to just add a few additional pieces of communication around boundaries, whether it's our own or other people's boundaries. So, one thing that's really important to get a handle on is our boundaries with ourselves and recognizing our internal red flags and behaviors or patterns that aren't aligned for us, connections that seem to bring out the worst in us, which can signal to us that that's just, a bad match, a misalignment. And also patterns that we can maybe work on a little bit to bring ourselves into greater alignment. And one example of that is my friend Laura and I, in another episode, we talked about the Cartman drama triangle and the victim rescuer pattern. For me, something I've noticed is that when someone comes to me in like full-blown victim mode, desperate, needing my help, it really activates my rescuer impulse. And I don't like that. That's not really aligned with my values and goals. So I would rather be that coach that we spoke about in that other episode. And just for a quick little recap, the rescuer effectively enables the victim's delusion of disempowerment. And the coach remembers that we're all divine creatures, we're all imbued with immense power, and we carry that knowing even when someone else forgets it. And so if someone comes to me desperate, needing me to save them or fix it or solve the problem for them, instead of buying into that delusion of their disempowerment and sort of agreeing with them and being like, oh, you're right, you poor helpless thing, let me fix it for you. Remembering within myself that they're a powerful being, they may have forgotten, but I can help them get back to it. And one of the ways that we can do that is through co-regulation. And so the first step is to notice, always noticing, notice what's happening. Notice that they're caught up in a victim mentality. Notice that it's sucking you into that delusion as well. Step out of it, ground in yourself, center, tap into your root chakra, into the ground and your power. And then you can see their power, and you can then sort of guide them into a body scan themselves. Like, hey, you seem really agitated right now. I get that this is a big problem. I'm here to, help you get through it. But let's start by grounding in your body. Maybe tell me about the sensations you're noticing. We're going to set the stories aside for just a moment and tap into the body and check in with our nervous system. And in so doing, we're going to kind of help calm it down a little bit so that our mental functions are sharper. So You can invite them to say, like, what are you feeling in your body? Where are you feeling it? Describe the sensation. It's a great way to get out of the mind and that mental story that spins us up and dumps chemicals into our body. And then it's this vicious feedback loop. So one of my personal boundaries is not falling into rescuer mode. And I've noticed that when people fall into victim mode, it activates my rescuer. And so to help me not disempower them, I notice the pattern, I check in with myself, ground myself, and invite them to do the same. And then we can problem solve. And then we can say, okay, so you have this problem. What are your options? How can I help you? In an actually helpful way that's not, again, empowering those delusions of disempowerment. So that's one little tidbit for personal boundaries and helping others with their boundaries and their empowerment. Another piece that I wanted to touch on is following up a little bit more on some of the topics that I discussed in the previous episode with my friend Sarah. And when you receive pushback on your boundaries, there is also a pushback that I have a aspirational response to. And it's when I'm maybe thinking out loud about a decision, but it's mostly made, or maybe I have made the decision and I'm just telling someone about it. And when their response is a sort of pushback to my choice, there is a very natural impulse to defend and be like, you know what, that's not what I want to do. I actually want to do this. And they might say something like, oh, but that's such a horrible choice. Why would you want to do that? I would never do that, And then you want to defend the goodness of your choice, the goodness of your thinking, the goodness of your being. And getting defensive is another one of my internal red flags. It's not in alignment with me. It's not something that I want to do. I don't want to feel like I need to defend myself. And in most cases, you actually really don't. So when I notice myself in that with someone, especially about like a choice, I haven't mastered this yet, to be clear. So like I said, this is sort of an aspirational response, but I've seen others do it once or twice, masters in these skills. But the idea is to just, in a second, just check in. When you notice the impulse to defend, just check in and be like, I'm good. I don't need to discuss this choice that I've made. I don't need to convince them that it's a good choice or that I'm good. I don't need to convince myself. I'm pretty well decided at this point. So, yep, good there. But they seem to be having a hard time. And this is like sincere empathy and compassion. And so if they say something like, oh, that's a horrible idea, you could just pause and say, I'm pretty committed to it, but clearly this is bringing up something in you. What is it? What's coming up for you? And invite them to talk about it. Granted, some people will get very offended and go, what? And they won't want to change the subject to themselves at all, and that's okay. But you've redirected the conversation. An alternative there is to do something like that co-regulation technique as well and just say like, wow, it seems like you're really activated by this. Where are you feeling that in your body? Do you want to talk about that? Or, do you want to work through that? And so you can, and I don't mean this to be like a avoidant type deflection, but it's a way to stay connected with them and stay in conversation with them and just sort of redirect the focus of discussion off of the decision that's been made, or maybe it's just a decision you realize you don't want their input on. But stay in connection and say, hey, now something's up for you. We can talk about that if you would like. And maybe they don't, and then you just change the subject altogether. But now, this brings me to a third point that I did also want to touch on, and we can call it capacity. So I've talked about boundaries being our resource limits, and a really simple version of that, it's not all inclusive, but it's fairly inclusive. It's capacity. Like, I talk about some of our boundaries, some of our limited resources being things like time, energy, and attention. So those are things that we have capacity. Like, what are the limits of my capacity for attention today? How much capacity do I have to care? How many fucks do I have to give today, literally? Because there is a finite amount of those. So there's also capacity in terms of a person's nervous system, like how big of emotions they can handle without shutting down or going into some sort of trauma response with their nervous system. There's also an emotional intelligence capacity. So capacity is often a boundary that people aren't aware of. And part of that is because it can really fluctuate from day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute even. But you can usually detect when you're coming up against someone else's capacity limits just by the way that they're showing up or responding or not showing up or responding. And part of developing healthy boundaries is not only learning and respecting your own boundaries, but also honoring other people's boundaries when they state them and even when they don't. And so if they're showing you the limits of their capacity, it's really best to just take that at face value and not shame them for it, not try to change them or their capacity, and just take note and just be like, oh, okay, they don't have the capacity for this. And then it's up to you to decide if you want to maybe bring the need that you might have that they're unable to meet to someone else. Or maybe you decide that it's time to readjust or redefine the relationship. Or maybe a little bit more distance is called for. You know, love is many things. To me, the most potent version of it is a verb. And I think that in that sense, it's most synonymous with acceptance. Accepting people for who they are, where they are, what the limits of their capacity are, and changing dynamics instead of people is a much more loving way to respond to our humanness and social interactions and relationship dynamics. So changing dynamics instead of people is always more loving. Now, part of getting there is, again, like self-awareness too. So I think, and I've said this before, and if I've mentioned it on this podcast, well, here's another repeat of it, but I think that it's a really great idea for every individual in their development to go through a phase of self-inquiry. Usually this might start as early as late teens, but it's probably best done in like 20s up through maybe like mid 30s, where you're questioning yourself. When you notice that you get triggered by things, if your impulse is to lean into something but that keeps proving dysfunctional, maybe it's time to start saying, like, what is that impulse? Is that actually helpful? Is this a trauma response, or is this something that's benefiting me? And just those types of self-inquiry and questioning yourself and your motives and your impulses. If you do that, if you spend 10 to 15 years doing that, then there's another really important thing that I think a lot of people who do that miss out on, because that self-inquiry can become habitual. And it's important to recognize once you've been doing that for 10 to 15 years, you graduate. You have spent enough time questioning and refining yourself and learning about yourself and really coming into alignment with yourself. Then, after that, it's time to stop questioning yourself and to start really developing self-trust. And if your body is telling you that it's a no to something, don't question it. Don't push it. Don't be like, oh, but I think this is probably really good for us. Well, work on whatever you need to work on in order for it to not feel so activating before you push yourself through it. Again, I think when we're younger, we're also more resilient. It's a great time to push yourself through things and see what happens. There's just a lot more experimentation, I think it's called for, and beneficial. And again, after that, it's time to shift into developing self-trust because you've earned it. And I say all of this to say that later in life, when you detect a misalignment, start moving away from it. Start taking steps to move towards better alignment, whether it's a relationship, a job. And I'm being really repetitive here, but like when you're younger, if something feels bad or uncomfortable and you're like, I want out of this, like maybe you're being a bit too hasty. Maybe you need to learn how to work through some challenges. But like I said, after you've done that, you've earned the right to know what is beneficial to push through and what is detrimental to push through. So have that discernment is my point. And so when you notice something is out of alignment, I don't recommend being reactionary, but trust it immediately and just say like, you know what, this is not aligned for me. I need to start taking steps to shift the dynamic or the arrangement or, build a more stable foundation for me to step out of this and onto that. And then from there can start to build some scaffolding and something better and more aligned to support me in my social needs, connection needs, financial needs, purpose needs, whatever those types of relationships or arrangements might be providing in your life. So, final point that I'll make today is just a shameless plug about coaching, and it doesn't have to be with me. If you feel aligned with me, I do offer coaching services, mainly around developing self-love and healthy boundaries so that you can have fulfilling relationships, you can stop over-giving and start actually feeling appreciated, and you can learn how to say no as easily as a joyful yes. However, whatever your goals are, at any stage of life, and hopefully you end up with several goals throughout your life. You achieve one and you celebrate it, and then eventually you develop a next level that you want to achieve. And that's always going to bring stuff up in our subconscious. Part of our brain is wired to keep us from making changes. So there's always going to be some things you got to push through, and coaches can be really good at helping you through that. And another thing that they're really good at is helping you see your blind spots, because there's always, you can't see the back of your head. It's always going to be a thing. And I have been a personal growth geek since I was 10. I have developed a lot of self-awareness, but I still have my blind spots. And they evolve as I do. So every time I find one, there's another one crops up later. So in fact, one of the coaches I'm working with presently, recently, just by holding space and reflecting things that probably seem really obvious to her or maybe even anyone else, and she can just reflect it back to me, and I'm just I always have these ahas that are just they seem so obvious. I'm like, I can't believe I didn't see that, but it still happens, and I'm still grateful for the gift of coaching. It's a joy to provide, and it's a joy to receive, and I encourage you to give that to yourself for your own benefit, as well as the benefit of the people and causes you care most about in your life. Supporting yourself and your well-being and your growth are just going to further all of those relationships and causes too. So again, if you're interested in working with me, you can find me at explorelovingboundaries.com. That's a page on my website that'll get you straight to my calendar for a free call. I just want to hear about what you're going through, and we can talk solutions. It might be working with me, it might be some free resources, it might be a referral, but there is a solution, and I'm happy to help you find it. So wherever you're at on your journey, I send you love and courage. Namaste.